The pie tin was still warm in my hands when my grandson leaned back and said, "You'll be gone soon anyway." As his father, my own son, looked away. I just straightened the silverware like it still mattered. While cinnamon filled the silence, I remembered holding that boy as a newborn, whispering promises into his hair. The same blood I once fed from my own hands now spoke like I was furniture with an expiration date. That's when I realized they weren't grieving, they were circling, so I struck their names from the will before the pie even cooled. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanksgiving dinner at Marjorie's home. Every seat filled, but no warmth. The dining room table was a museum piece, mahogany polished to a high gloss. Surrounded by antique ladder-back chairs Marjorie had inherited from her grandmother. It was set for 10, the fine china and heavy silver laid out with obsessive care. But for all its elegance, the air was dry with tension, like the moment before a storm hits and the birds go silent. Turkey carved, cranberry sauce scooped, dishes passed left. Conversation, if you could call it that, was shallow and scattered. Weather, work, the school board's latest fiasco. No one mentioned the elephant in the room. Not directly. At the head of the table, Marjorie sat straight-backed, her blonde gray hair swept into a low chignon, cardigan buttoned neatly over a rust-colored blouse. She was the kind of woman who carried control in her posture, but tonight, that composure sat under siege. "Ben," she said lightly, gesturing to the basket near his elbow, "would you mind passing the rolls?" Benjamin didn't look up from his phone. His thumb flicked once more before he sighed and reached for the breadbasket. He didn't hand it to her. He just pushed it toward the center of the table, still staring at the screen, his voice coming out like an afterthought. "You'll be gone soon anyway." A half laugh slipped from his mouth, like it wasn't meant to be said aloud but felt too satisfying to keep in. Forks froze, midair. Alan, Marjorie's older son, seated diagonally across from her, glanced up sharply. "Ben, that's not funny." Benjamin shrugged, eyes still on his screen. "I thought it was." The silence that followed didn't scream. It exhaled. Marjorie calmly finished chewing her bite of stuffing. She reached for her water, took a sip, then dabbed her mouth with her napkin. No reaction, no flicker in her eyes. Her quiet steadiness made the room feel colder. "Well," she said finally, her voice even, not brittle, "I suppose that's one way to look at legacy." Benjamin looked up now, just for a second. There was something smug behind his eyes, something adolescent and cruel, even though he was well past college. 29 and still reacting like a teenager who thought pain was leverage. Alan broke the silence. "Mom, I'm sorry, that was—" He cut a look at Ben, eyes narrowing. Uncalled for. Marjorie gave him a small nod, not of gratitude, but permission. Let it go. She wanted the dinner to continue. But no one reached for the green beans. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, a smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. "You've been acting like the world's gonna end for months. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." "Is that what everyone's thinking?" Marjorie asked softly. Her eyes were on him now, direct, piercing. No one answered. Plates clinked as a few people resumed eating just to fill the silence. "I'm not dying, Benjamin," she said. "I'm downsizing. There's a difference. You're selling the house. That's basically the same thing in this family," her hands folded in her lap. Her nails, manicured in a muted mauve, didn't tremble. "I built this house, paid every mortgage, cooked every holiday meal you've ever eaten under this roof. If you think its walls are more valuable than the person who made them matter," she let that hang. "Then I've done a poor job raising you." That landed heavier than any slap. Benjamin blinked. The silence this time wasn't awkward. It was damning. In the corner, the candles flickered. A serving spoon slipped from someone's plate and hit china with a clink. Alan shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the living room. "Mom," but Marjorie wasn't done. "I'll be signing the papers on Monday," she said, "and I'll be doing it alone. This house is mine to sell, and my reasons are mine to keep." Benjamin opened his mouth, probably to joke, deflect, claw back some power, but before he could, the front doorbell rang. 3 sharp chimes. Everyone paused. They weren't expecting anyone else. Marjorie stood slowly, napkin folded and set on her plate. She didn't rush. "I'll get it," she said. And as she walked out of the dining room, the tension she left behind buzzed like a wire stripped bare. The doorbell rang 3 times. But the real reckoning came in silence. It wasn't a guest, just a neighborhood kid dropping off a pie his mother forgot to bring earlier. Marjorie accepted it with a practiced smile and a thank you, then set it on the entryway table like it weighed nothing at all. She never returned to the dining room. Instead, she walked down the hallway, past framed school photos and oil paintings of places she'd never visited, until she reached her study. The door clicked shut behind her. She didn't turn on the overhead light, just the desk lamp, which pooled gold across the oak surface. There, where the mahogany bled into shadow, sat the manila folder she had pulled from the safe last week. She had looked at it 3 times since then. Tonight made it 4. Marjorie sat, smoothed her blouse, and opened the folder. The will was as she remembered. Neat. Legal. Reasonable, even. Benjamin was listed to inherit the cabin in Vermont. A quiet A-frame tucked beside a lake that no one in the family had visited in 5 years, not since Harold died. Along with it, half her remaining savings. Alan would receive the other half, plus her modest investment accounts. The house, now sold, was to be split equally. Benjamin didn't know he was getting more than anyone else. He never earned it, but she'd once thought he needed it more. Her hand hesitated over the page, fingers pressing lightly on Benjamin's name. Not angry, not shaking, just thinking. The study felt colder than it should have, like the room knew what she was considering before she said it aloud. She remembered the way Benjamin used to fall asleep in her lap as a boy, sweaty-headed from backyard soccer games. How he used to ask for one more chapter of Charlotte's Web, never anything else. Every single night for a year, she'd sit in that same chair, holding that same tattered paperback, watching his eyes drift shut by the time Charlotte spelled her second word in the web. She had thought love like that grew roots, that it held. Instead, it curdled. Or maybe it was never as deep as she wanted to believe. She reached for the pen. A soft knock came at the doorframe. She didn't turn. "You still want coffee?" Ruth's voice. Low, even, dependable. Marjorie's sister had always known when to be present and when to stay invisible. "No," Marjorie said. "Just a moment." Ruth didn't move, didn't ask. "I keep thinking," Marjorie said quietly, "that time buys clarity. But sometimes all it does is disguise it." Ruth stepped into the room and sat across from her without invitation. She looked down at the will, but didn't touch it. "Disrespect," Ruth said after a pause, "is louder when it's generational. You taught him tenderness. Someone else taught him how to discard it." Marjorie looked up. "Then the correction," she said, voice like dry ice, "must echo longer than the failure." A beat passed. The pen rolled half an inch under her hand. Ruth stood. "Don't tell me what you change. Just make sure it sticks." Marjorie waited until she was alone again. Then she picked up the cordless phone from the corner of the desk. She still kept one, despite the cell she barely used, and dialed a number from memory. A woman's voice answered, crisp, professional. "Paula Rhodes speaking." "Paula, it's Marjorie Haynes. I need to make a revision to my documents." There was a pause on the other end. "Is this about the property or the estate?" Marjorie's eyes flicked to Benjamin's name again. "Both," she said. "And I'd like it notarized before Monday." Another pause. "That's fast." "Yes," Marjorie said. "It is." From the hallway came the low murmur of dishes being cleared, chairs scraping back. Life was still happening out there, but in here, something irreversible had already begun. Marjorie set the will aside and pulled out a blank legal pad. She drew one clean line down the center, then wrote 2 names at the top of each column. Alan Benjamin. She stared at the empty space beneath them, and then slowly began to list not assets, but debts. Some apologies are just placeholders for the next offense. The message came the next morning, tucked between a discount code from Target and a group thread about pie leftovers. Marjorie almost missed it until she saw the name. Melissa Haynes sent 7:40 a.m. Just wanted to say sorry for any awkwardness last night. Ben's comment was out of line, and we're all a little frayed with the move and everything. Hope you're feeling okay today. Happy Thanksgiving again. No punctuation out of place, no warmth behind the words. Marjorie stared at it from the kitchen table, where her coffee had long since gone cold. The message was exactly what Melissa always sent. Polished, timed, performative. The kind of thing you text your boss after accidentally forwarding a meme about quitting. A PR scrub on a mess you had no intention of cleaning. There was no mention of what was said. No direct apology. Not from Benjamin. Not from Alan. Just this. She didn't reply. She didn't delete it either. She let it sit there, glowing quietly in her inbox like a splinter too small to remove, but too deep to ignore. Ruth entered from the hallway, still in slippers. Her silver hair mussed and staticky. She poured herself half a mug of coffee, no cream, then leaned against the counter, watching Marjorie with that unnervingly still expression she'd perfected during 30 years as a high school vice principal. Melissa sent a text, Marjorie said after a moment. I saw. Alan hasn't followed up. Nope. Marjorie's fingers hovered over her phone, then set it down like it had failed some unspoken test. Ruth took a sip of her coffee, swallowed, then said, They'll forget by Christmas. Marjorie looked at her. I won't. Ruth nodded once, approving. Good. 2 hours later, Marjorie stood in front of a frosted glass door on the 4th floor of a bland office plaza that smelled like printer toner and mid-level regret. The brass plate read, Paula Rhodes, ESQ, Estate Planning and Trust Law. Inside, Paula was already waiting, glasses perched low on her nose, a yellow legal pad open on the desk in front of her. I wasn't sure if you'd be in town today, Paula said, gesturing toward the chair. I've got my binder, Marjorie replied, setting it down like a stone. And I've got notes. She opened the leather binder and flipped past tabs labeled Insurance, Property, Deeds, and Savings. The final section, marked Estate, was the thickest. Tucked in its sleeve was the current will, printed and initialed. Paula reached for it, but Marjorie held it back for just a moment longer. I want to do something first, she said. She pulled a black ballpoint from her purse, uncapped it. Then, in a smooth, deliberate motion, she drew a single unbroken line through Benjamin's name. She didn't scribble. She didn't slash. She crossed it out like correcting a spelling error, firm, permanent, and utterly unemotional. Only then did she pass the will across the desk. Paula said nothing, just nodded. I want the cabin to be donated, Marjorie said, to the Veterans Rest Fund. Harold always said if he'd had a place like that when he came back, things would have been different. And the savings? Alan can keep what's already there, but I want the next clause to reflect the new trust, something that matures only if he meets specific conditions. Do you want to set a trigger, like a birthday or a retirement? No, Marjorie said, her voice suddenly harder. I want it to release only if he stays in contact with me for the next 3 years, not monthly, weekly, a call, a visit, something that shows up on a phone bill. Paula paused, then slowly began writing. And Benjamin, she asked carefully. Marjorie didn't hesitate. Nothing, not even a line saying he's disinherited. He doesn't deserve the dignity of being mentioned. The pen in Paula's hand stilled for a second. Then she nodded again. Would you like to add a letter of intent? Sometimes it helps avoid legal challenges later. Marjorie opened the small front pocket of her binder and pulled out a sealed envelope. I already wrote it. It's not for them. It's for the court. They can read about it in probate if they bother to show up. Paula reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing Marjorie's for just a moment. There was something in her eyes, respect, maybe, or caution, as if she understood this wasn't about money at all. It was about legacy, and who got to define it. Outside, through the glass window, November sun glared off the roof of Marjorie's car. She could already feel the steering wheel heating under it, but she wasn't in a hurry to leave. She looked around the office, the neat desk, the potted fern, the calendar already flipped to December. Do you believe people change? Marjorie asked, her voice almost casual. Paula raised an eyebrow. Professionally or personally? Either. Paula gave a small smile. I believe people reveal. Marjorie nodded once, then stood. I'll be back Monday, she said, with signatures. As she left the office, the door closed softly behind her. but not before Paula saw the envelope Marjorie left on the chair. Not the letter of intent, a second one, unmarked and sealed. Some documents closed doors, others opened them. Marjorie didn't go home right away. She parked in the library lot and sat for nearly an hour with the engine off. The late afternoon sun warming the cabin of her sedan just enough to fog the windshield with her breath. Her hand stayed on the steering wheel, resting at 10 and 2, like she might still be waiting for a test she didn't study for. The envelope on the passenger seat stayed untouched. It was the third copy she'd sealed. One was for the court, one was for Ruth, and this one was for the contingency she hadn't told anyone about yet. She finally slid it into the glove box, shut it, and turned the key. That evening, Ruth was shelling walnuts in the living room, a towel across her lap, and an old ceramic bowl balanced on her knees. The crack of each shell was sharp, rhythmic, almost meditative. The TV was on but muted. A documentary about coastal erosion flickered across the screen without sound. "You dropped something off," Ruth said, without looking up. Marjorie sat down across from her, kicking off her shoes. "Yes. You want to tell me what was in it?" "No." Ruth nodded, cracked another walnut, tossed the shell into the empty yogurt container on the floor. "I figured." Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but taut. Not unlike the way wires hum just before a current flows through them. "They'll wonder," Ruth said finally, "when the time comes." "They'll know," Marjorie replied. "That's enough." Ruth tilted her head, considering that. "You planning on telling Alan anything?" "Not yet." "Because you think he'll leak it, or because you still think he might earn it?" Marjorie's lips pressed together. She didn't answer. The next morning, a voicemail waited on her landline. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to check in. Sorry I haven't followed up sooner. Things got loud after we left. Ben's in one of his moods, and Melissa's spinning it like she always does. Anyway, I hope you're okay. I'll come by next week." Click. No apology. Just a placeholder, a verbal version of Melissa's text. Something to put on the record, not in the heart. She deleted it before it could finish rewinding. At the post office, she mailed the first envelope to the county courthouse. Certified. Return receipt requested. As she stood at the counter, double-checking the address, she noticed the man behind her watching. Late 50s, balding. Neatly dressed in a faded windbreaker. Too still for someone just waiting in line. When she turned, he gave a polite nod. "Estate work?" he asked casually, glancing at the envelope. Marjorie's fingers curled slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Just noticed the address. My brother sent his paperwork to the same office last year. Probate division." She studied him. His tone was warm, neutral, but there was something about him that didn't sit right, like a painting hung slightly crooked. She smiled politely. "Just cleaning up some files." "Well," he said, stepping forward as her receipt printed. "I always say it's better to handle it now than wait for someone else to screw it up." She didn't respond. The clerk handed her the receipt. She took it, turned, and walked out without a word. She didn't look back. That night, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Marjorie sat at her desk again. The legal pad with Alan and Benjamin's names still lay open, though she had added nothing beneath either in days. Instead, she turned a fresh page and drew a new name at the top, Melissa. She stared at it, underlined it, then, without emotion, wrote the word, leverage. She closed the pad. Outside, a car idled for too long at the end of the driveway before slowly pulling away. Some signatures are cleaner than silence. The new documents arrived Thursday morning, printed on thick ivory paper and stacked with a paperclip so tight it left a bite mark in the corner. Paula had delivered them herself. "I wanted to make sure there weren't any surprises," she said, setting the folder on Marjorie's kitchen table. She wore a camel-colored coat and smelled faintly of almond soap and toner. Marjorie poured them both tea, Earl Grey, no sugar, and sat across from her. There were no distractions, no Ruth cracking walnuts, no voicemail blinking. No noise but the quiet hum of a decision becoming permanent. Paula opened the folder. "Benjamin's name has been fully removed," she said, flipping the first page. "Including revocation of any prior designation. No disinheritance clause, just omission." "Legally cleaner," Marjorie nodded once. "The new beneficiary on the savings account and cabin is listed here." Paula tapped the line beneath. Leah Henderson. She's young, Paula said carefully. You may want to consider a trustee structure to delay full access until a set age. I trust her judgment now more than I've trusted others after 30 years. Paula didn't argue. She turned the next page. We also added a contest clause. Anyone who attempts to challenge the document in court forfeits their share, automatically, including Alan. Marjorie let that sit in the air for a full beat. Good, she said. When she reached for the pen, her hand didn't tremble. She signed each page slowly, deliberately, like someone not crossing a line, but redrawing the map entirely. On the final signature, she exhaled. Not relief, not triumph, just release. When it was done, she placed the pen down with a small, satisfied click. It's not punishment, she said. It's recognition. Paula closed the folder and slid it gently back into her bag. Then I think we're done here, she said. Unless you decide to revise again. Marjorie smiled. I don't think I will. Later that afternoon, the house smelled like cinnamon and butter. Ruth had commandeered the kitchen, her sleeves dusted with flour, a small blue post-it stuck to the oven timer reading, "For your first clean cut in years." The pie, apple, with just a hint of nutmeg, sat cooling on the window ledge like something from a storybook. Marjorie didn't quite believe anymore. You ever notice how people treat pie like an apology? Ruth said, wiping her hands. Nobody bakes a pie for someone they hate. It's always the olive branch. Marjorie took a knife from the drawer. Well, she said dryly, maybe they should start. Ruth grinned and pulled out plates. The phone rang at 6:12 p.m. Marjorie let it go to voicemail, but Ruth raised an eyebrow from the armchair. Alan, she guessed. Marjorie shrugged. She waited until the machine clicked on before she picked up. Hi, Alan, she said, flat. Oh, you are there. Hey. Something you need? There was a pause, a throat clear, then, Ben's birthday's next week. Melissa's planning dinner. Just something small. Marjorie waited. I was wondering, are you sending anything? She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked across the table at the pie. Half-eaten, crumbs scattered. Then down at her tea, long gone cold. She imagined the box in the hall closet. The stack of birthday cards she'd kept over the years. The ones she'd sent even when Benjamin hadn't called. Even when she had to look up his address again because he'd moved without telling her. Even when the cards came back, unopened. No, she said simply. I won't be. Another pause. I figured. Just thought I'd ask. A long silence followed. Marjorie could almost hear Alan weighing whether to press, to defend, to soften the edge. He didn't. I'll let you go, he said finally. But before he could hang up, she spoke again. Alan. Yeah? Next year, she said quietly. Don't ask. Click. She set the phone back in the cradle, walked to the kitchen, and rinsed her cup in the sink. Outside, the late November sky was dimming into that gray-blue shadow stage before sunset. A few leaves scraped across the driveway. From upstairs came the soft creak of the floorboards, Ruth's footsteps, slow and steady. Marjorie dried her hands on a dish towel, folded it neatly, then opened the hall closet. At the very back, behind the coats, was a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper. She stared at it. It was the gift she'd bought Benjamin 2 years ago. A framed photo of Harold in the cabin's canoe. His last fishing trip with both boys. She had never mailed it. She pulled it out now and placed it in the donation box by the door. Then, without hesitation, she tore off the tag. Some silences don't protect peace. They protect the problem. Alan arrived just after 3 on a Sunday. Exactly on time. Exactly as she'd expected. He knocked once, then let himself in through the side door like he always had. No announcement, just habit. The same wool coat, the same faint cologne, the same air of quiet usefulness that had once made him Marjorie's favorite to depend on. Smells good in here, he said as he stepped into the kitchen. Is that cinnamon again? Chai, she corrected, setting a second mug on the table. Sit. He did. The gesture was polite but tense, his shoulders tight, fingers worrying the edge of a napkin. The air between them hummed with something that wasn't quite hostility. It was worse than that. It was history. She took her seat across from him and didn't waste time. I want to talk about Benjamin, she said. Alan exhaled, long and low. I figured. I assume you've heard what he said at dinner. Yeah, he said carefully. He told me it came out wrong. It didn't come out wrong, Marjorie said. It came out true. That's worse. Alan's gaze dropped to the table. He's just a kid. She raised an eyebrow. He's 21. And cruel. Alan rubbed his jaw. He's angry, Mom. About Dad. About the house. About a lot of things he won't name. And you let him weaponize that anger, she said evenly. You stand beside him and call it grief. That's not fair. It's entirely fair, she said. You raised him too, Alan. Every time you covered for him. Every time you said he didn't mean it. You taught him there were no consequences, only excuses. Her voice stayed calm, but the room shifted. Even the teacups seemed to shrink from the quiet weight of it. Alan leaned back, trying to deflect. I'm not going to defend what he said, but he's still growing up. No, Marjorie said softly. He's grown. You just don't want to admit what he's become. Alan's eyes flicked up, surprised by her precision. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope, Paula's letterhead visible through the crease. She laid it flat on the table. What's that? He asked. The revised will, she said. Benjamin's name is no longer included. Alan blinked. You're serious. Very. He sat back, silent for a long time. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. His expression shifted. Shock, confusion, calculation, before finally settling into resignation. He didn't argue. He didn't even ask why. It's your right, he said. Marjorie nodded. It was also your job to teach him better. That landed harder than anything before. Alan swallowed, looked down at his untouched tea. The liquid had gone lukewarm. The steam vanished. I tried, he said after a long pause. No, Marjorie said. You managed. That's not the same thing. He exhaled through his nose, then looked up at her. What do you want me to do? Nothing, she said. That's the beauty of it. There's nothing left to fix. He opened his mouth, closed it again. After a moment, he nodded, stood, and reached for his coat. At the doorway, he hesitated. Does he know? Not yet, she said. He'll find out. I expect he will. Alan lingered one heartbeat longer. He'll hate you for it. Marjorie met his eyes. Then he'll finally feel something honest. He didn't respond, just left. The screen door clicked behind him, too gently to feel final. The sun dipped low across the kitchen floor, cutting through the window blinds in thin gold slats. Dust motes swam in it, rising and falling in slow rhythm. Marjorie reached across the table, lifted his untouched cup, and took a sip. It was cold, bitter, but not unpleasant. Then she set it down and noticed what he'd left behind on the counter. His leather gloves, still damp from the walk. And beneath them, half hidden under a stray receipt, was a folded note in Alan's handwriting. She picked it up, unfolded it, and read, You think he learned cruelty from me. Maybe he learned it from watching you survive. Her eyes didn't move for several seconds. Then she folded the note in half, tore it cleanly down the middle, and dropped both pieces into the sink. She turned on the faucet. The paper pulped instantly. The most desperate people don't want justice. They want a crowd. The post dropped on a Tuesday. No names, no hashtags. Just a dimly lit photo of Benjamin blowing out candles at a kitchen table. The cake was store-bought, slumped slightly to one side, and the background revealed a cluttered countertop that hadn't been staged. Melissa's caption was short, but sharpened like a pin. Some people forget who raised them. Grateful hearts are hard to find these days. Within hours, the likes rolled in. The comments followed. Sending love. Hope everything's okay, sweetie. Family stuff is the worst. People don't change. They just show you who they really are. By evening, Marjorie's inbox pinged twice, then 4 more times. Acquaintances she hadn't spoken to since Harold's funeral. Old church friends who now lived across state lines. PTA women who used to share casseroles and complaint sessions about school fundraisers. Saw something online. Hope everything's all right? Don't know the details, but if you need someone to talk to. Are you okay? This doesn't sound like you. Marjorie didn't reply. She didn't even open most of them. She let the notifications pile like leaves she'd never bother raking. By the time Ruth stepped inside that evening, carrying a box of yard sale books and smelling like early fall and peppermint gum, Marjorie was already seated at the kitchen table, sorting through a drawer of stamps and envelopes, each movement deliberate. Ruth dropped the books on the floor by the door and tilted her head. "What is it now?" Marjorie didn't look up. "Melissa's reaching for a bigger audience. Did she tag you?" "No, cowards don't use hop signs." Ruth leaned on the counter, unwrapping a butterscotch. She always did love the long game. Drama's easier than therapy. Marjorie tapped one envelope flat against the table. "They want a version of me they can burn," she said. "Something to explain the things they don't want to take responsibility for." "Let them spin," Ruth replied. "You're doing what none of them ever dared, choosing truth." Marjorie paused, then gave a single nod. "I just won't choose the stage." That night the house was unusually quiet. No tea, no chatter, no hum of old sitcom reruns rerunning. Just the low hush of wind against the gutters and Ruth's footsteps upstairs. In the study, Marjorie sat at her desk with a fresh sheet of stationery in front of her. It was the thick kind, cream-colored with a soft linen texture and her full name embossed faintly at the top. She clicked her pen once, then began writing. "Leah, you don't know this yet, but the cabin is yours. So are the savings. It's written, it's final. You don't need to accept it, but it's there. I want you to understand something that the people I raised never could. This is not a reward. This is not leverage. This is not payback. This is recognition. You never asked for anything. You just showed up, with kindness, with consistency, with the kind of quiet strength I mistook for rarity, but now believe might just be decency, uncorrupted. I don't need you to be grateful. I just need you to know it was never about them. It was about finally choosing something that felt right, without apology." MH. She reread it once. No edits. No flinching. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, then sealed it without addressing it. She slipped it into the small fireproof safe in the corner of the closet, beside the will and the deed transfer confirmation. Not for now, maybe never. But truth, like glass, should be kept clean, even when it's not on display. At midnight, as she poured herself a glass of water, Marjorie stepped onto the back porch. The cold bit at her wrists. The neighborhood slept. Then, beyond the fence line, a shadow shifted. Not the wind. Not a tree. Something that had been standing still. And then wasn't. She didn't call out. She didn't step forward. She simply stood in the doorway, light behind her, watching the dark. And the dark watched back. Sometimes dignity looks like silence. Sometimes it is. The first text came at 6:18 a.m. Ben, was it true? Did you really cut me out? No punctuation, no greeting, no warmth. Marjorie read it while standing at the kitchen window, coffee still steeping, steam rising from the kettle like breath in cold air. She didn't reply. She didn't even lock the phone. She set it on the counter and watched a squirrel run the length of the back fence. Her mug, when she finally poured it, was half full. Ruth always told her that meant she was an optimist pretending not to be. By 8:04 a.m., another text came in. Ben, you're ruining this family. That one made her pause, not out of shock, but fatigue. The line was tired, overused. A cliché that blamed boundaries for what decay had already undone. She tapped the message once, then deleted it. No reply was the reply. At 10:37 a.m., her inbox chimed. Subject: Can we talk? It was from Alan. His message was longer, but equally familiar in tone, a meandering apology peppered with defense, self-soothing and lightly padded guilt. You have to understand, he's young, and he lashes out when he's scared. He looks up to you more than he can admit. I know he crossed a line, but maybe this doesn't have to be permanent. I just think if we keep dividing this family over one moment, we're going to regret it in 10 years. I don't want to regret anything. And I don't think you do either. Marjorie stared at the glowing screen. A decade ago, this kind of message would have kept her up at night. Now, it just made her tired in her spine. She didn't respond. She saved it to a folder called Unfinished Conversations and closed the laptop. At lunch, She met Paula downtown. They sat outside, coats buttoned, wind biting, bowls of chili steaming between them. "I've seen families fracture over less," Paula said. "I've seen them take each other to court over toasters and quilt patterns." Marjorie sipped from her water, her face unreadable. "The paperwork holds?" she asked. Paula nodded. "It's airtight." "Good." Then, after a pause, Paula leaned forward and said gently, "Legal is clean. Emotion is not." Marjorie's spoon hovered over her bowl. "I'm not trying to clean it," she said. "I'm just done swimming in it." Later that day, Ruth found her at the hall mirror, adjusting the framed portrait of Harold again. She wasn't crying. She wasn't brooding. Just leveling. "You know what's coming," Ruth said, leaning in the doorway, arms crossed. "The phone calls, the visits, the guilt tours. Probably a couple vague threats." Marjorie didn't look away from the frame. "I know. You'll be the villain in their version now," Ruth said. "I've been the villain in their whispers for years," Marjorie replied. "This just makes it official." Ruth tilted her head. "Make peace with that. I already did." That night, the house was silent again. Ruth had gone to bed early. The radiator clanked occasionally like a machine clearing its throat. Marjorie sat in her study, bathed in the soft gold of the desk lamp. She opened her laptop. The file was already there. Obituary draft. Reverender 5. She scrolled past the usual. Born in 1952, married in 1975, widowed in 2010, retired from library services in 2014. Then she reached the line she'd left blank for months. "She is survived by..." She deleted it. Typed, "She is survived by grace, not obligation." She looked at it for a long time, then added, "She is preceded in death by her silence." She closed the file. Saved. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she smiled. Thin but real. Then her phone vibrated. One final message. From an unknown number again. "You think this is over because of a signature, but it isn't, and you know it." Marjorie stared at it for a full minute. Then slowly, calmly, she powered off the phone and locked it in her desk drawer. "You don't owe for what you gave freely, and you're not owed for what you never offered clean." It was mid-morning when Marjorie opened the safe. No ceremony, no hesitation. Just the clean rhythm of metal tumblers and the click of the latch. The envelope was still there, sealed, tucked behind the notarized documents. The air inside the safe always smelled slightly of old ink and lemon oil, like something pressed between pages of a book. She carried the envelope to the living room, where Ruth sat curled under a blanket with her feet tucked into the corner of the couch. A mystery novel was open on her lap. Spine cracked like a confession. Marjorie didn't ask. She just unfolded the envelope, pulled out the letter she had written to Leah weeks ago, and began reading. Her voice didn't shake. Every line landed exactly as it had when she first wrote it. Measured, quiet, exact. Ruth didn't interrupt, didn't nod. She listened like someone hearing something sacred, not hers to respond to. When Marjorie finished, she folded the letter once more. "I'm not giving it to her," she said simply. Ruth tilted her head. "Why?" "Because it wasn't for her," Marjorie said. "It was for me." She stood, crossed to the fireplace, and opened the screen. The morning coals were still warm from Ruth's earlier fire. She placed the letter gently inside and lit a match. The flame took quickly, no fanfare, no lingering. The paper curled in on itself like it had been waiting to be released. Ruth didn't speak until it was gone. "Better?" she asked. "Lighter," Marjorie replied. 2 days later, Paula handed her a manila envelope with the cabin's deed inside. "The transfer's final," she said, tucking her gloves into her coat. "Held in trust. It's Leah's upon your passing. No contest clause included." "Thank you," Marjorie said. "You don't want her to know yet?" "She'll find out when it means something, not before." Paula gave her a long look, part respect, part concern. "You're sure?" Marjorie didn't flinch. She never asked for anything. That's why it's hers. The following Sunday, the kettle began boiling before noon. Ruth arranged mismatched chairs in the living room. Marjorie brought out her old china set, the one with the blue larkspur pattern, and dusted off the dessert plates she hadn't used since Harold's wake. The guests arrived in twos and threes. Donna from the reference desk, Miles, the library intern who brought his own tea strainer and asked if the mugs were ethically sourced. Julia, fresh from grad school and overqualified to be working circulation. And Leah, last to arrive, hair slightly damp from the rain, holding a box of lemon shortbread she'd made from scratch. They laughed too loud at first, too polite, too formal. But then someone spilled honey. Someone else cursed softly when the teabag tag slipped into their cup. Ruth snorted at a joke about library patrons who used their phones as flashlights, and suddenly the formality cracked, and it all softened into something warmer. By the second Sunday, someone brought a guitar. By the third, Marjorie brought out old photo albums. By the fourth, they stopped knocking. She started tutoring again, quietly. No flyers, no announcements, just quiet word of mouth. High school juniors needing essay feedback. First-generation college applicants wrestling with FAFSA forms. One woman, mid-30s, 2 jobs, who just wanted help finishing her GED. Marjorie didn't charge them. She didn't offer them things. She offered time, language, structure, not wealth, wisdom. She did not fill the house with heirs. She filled it with potential. One evening, after the last of the tea had been drunk and the laughter lingered in the air like something cooked into the walls, Marjorie stood in the hallway alone. She looked around. Same house, same floorboards, same kitchen light above the sink. But it felt different, not redeemed, but re-inhabited. She pressed a hand to the wall, just for a second, as if checking its pulse. And then, as she turned off the light, she saw it. A single envelope tucked through the mail slot. No stamp, no address. Just one word on the front, null. She stared at it. Didn't open it, didn't touch it. Just stood in the quiet, knowing something old had just breathed again. Some doors don't close with locks. They close with choice. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line sterile and self-important. Documentation request. Confirmation of estate revision. Paula had forwarded it. Beneath her message was a single sentence. Please confirm any recent changes to Marjorie Haynes's estate. Family requires verification. No name, no signature. But Marjorie didn't need one. Benjamin. Of course it was. She read Paula's response twice. It was short, firm, and final. I'm afraid I cannot confirm or deny any client details. Please direct future inquiries through verified legal counsel. No emotion, no oxygen for fire. When Marjorie finished reading, she exhaled through her nose, quiet, steady, faintly amused. So now he wants receipts, she murmured, sliding her glasses off and setting them on the desk. Ruth, sitting by the window with her crossword, didn't look up. Of course he does. People like him think truth only exists on paper. He'll get nothing. Ruth penciled in a word. Futile. Then looked up. Then let him sit in the silence he gave you. Marjorie smiled, faint and real. Poetic as always. Practical, Ruth said. Poetry just makes it easier to swallow. The two women let the morning unfold in unhurried quiet. Outside, frost clung to the window edges like lace. The radiator hummed a low, sleepy tune. The world had softened into winter gray, but the house held steady heat. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Ruth was halfway up the stairs, muttering something about socks and age, when Marjorie opened the door. Leah stood there, cheeks pink from the cold, hair pulled back under a wool cap. She was holding a pie tin wrapped in foil, steam still ghosting from its vents. Happy birthday, she said, shy but proud. Marjorie blinked. You remembered. I always will, Leah said, stepping inside. Cherry, you said once it tasted like your childhood. Marjorie closed the door behind her. That was a long time ago, Leah smiled. You said that about everything good. Ruth appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, smiling with that half-suspicious fondness she reserved for anyone under 40. You made that crust yourself? Twice, Leah said. The first one didn't survive the cooling process. Ruth laughed, shook her head, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Marjorie led Leah into the living room, where the afternoon light poured through the curtains in honey-colored bands. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon, of old wood and warmth. They sat, they ate, they talked, not about the will, not about family, just about life. About the library's new outreach project. The teenagers who never returned their books but came back for help with essays. About Leah's mother, still in physical therapy, but improving. At one point, Leah said softly, "I don't know if I ever told you, but I'm starting a literacy group for adults." You inspired it. Marjorie looked at her over the rim of her cup. That sounds like work. It is, Leah said. The good kind. Marjorie reached for the small jewelry box on the side table. She'd kept it there all week, waiting for the right moment without knowing what that moment would be. Here, she said, handing it across. Leah frowned. I can't. You can, Marjorie interrupted gently. It was my mother's. She wore it the day she married my father and every Sunday after. She told me once it reminded her that love was duty, not decoration. I didn't understand that until recently. Leah opened the box. Inside, a gold locket gleamed softly in the late light. Simple, oval, engraved with a single letter, M. I can't take this, Leah said again, voice catching. Yes, you can, Marjorie said. You already carry the rest. Leah looked at her, eyes full, quiet. Thank you, Marjorie smiled, and for a moment the years between them fell away. Ruth reappeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. The girl brings pie and tears? She's a keeper. That made them both laugh. After Leah left, Marjorie stood at the window, watching her walk down the path, scarf trailing like a comet tail behind her. She pressed her palm against the glass, just for a moment. The pain was cold, the world beyond, gray and still. Then she turned to Ruth, who lingered in the archway. Every time I think it's done, Marjorie said, it has to be rewritten. Ruth tilted her head. Maybe that's what a clean ending looks like. Rewriting until you stop needing to. Marjorie nodded, but her gaze drifted to the hallway table. Another envelope lay there. Unmarked, folded in half. No handwriting, no postmark. Just one sentence typed in the center. If the door closes, I'll find another way in. The pie on the counter still smelled sweet, but the air had shifted. Some visitors bring flowers. Others bring expectations wrapped in civility. She arrived just after noon. No text, no warning. Just the sound of a car door, a polite knock, and the blur of pale pink lipstick behind the frosted glass. Marjorie opened the door with the same expression she might use to open junk mail. Polite, measured. Already done before it began. Melissa, she said. Marjorie, Melissa replied. Voice tight and breathless, like she was rushing through a performance she'd rehearsed, but didn't believe in. She stood on the porch in a fitted wool coat and heeled boots too delicate for the gravel. Her makeup was perfect, except for the corners of her mouth, which quivered with some combination of nerves and entitlement. I'm not here to make trouble, Melissa said quickly, eyes darting past the doorway, scanning for Ruth or a shadow of Leah. I just thought we could talk. Marjorie stepped aside, letting the door hang open, not as invitation, but as formality. Melissa entered the front hallway, her posture composed but visibly bracing. She smelled like roses and money. They settled in the sitting room. Melissa didn't take off her coat. I just wanted to say, she began, smoothing her gloves in her lap. I'm sorry. Marjorie waited. For? Melissa looked up, blinked, then smiled that too perfect smile she always wore when cameras or consequences were near. For how it's all played out, she said. For the way things feel right now. But not, Marjorie said evenly. For Benjamin. Melissa's silence stretched 2 beats too long. Well, he's upset, obviously, and hurt. Hurt, Marjorie repeated. Because of consequences. Melissa shifted in her seat. He didn't expect to be shut out. Alan says he's barely eating. Marjorie gave a small, unreadable nod. I imagine entitlement doesn't go down easy. Melissa flinched, but kept her tone smooth. Alan's caught in the middle, you know. He's trying to keep things civil. Caught, Marjorie said, turning her teacup slowly in her hands, is a choice when you stand for nothing. Melissa's jaw tightened. I just think, for everything you've been through, for everything you did for them, there's a way to fix this. Marjorie met her eyes now, clear, direct. There's nothing broken on my end. Melissa inhaled, like she was about to pivot, then exhaled and softened her voice. You raised him, Marjorie. You're abandoning him. Marjorie didn't blink. No, she said. I'm just not funding cruelty anymore. Melissa's lips parted, stunned, then stunned again that she had no comeback ready. Marjorie stood and walked to the kettle, poured 2 cups. Tea, she offered. Melissa stayed seated for a moment, expression carefully unreadable, then rose and shook her head. No, thank you. She stepped toward the door, the shift in her walk betraying discomfort. Heels slightly off, like she hadn't expected to leave with nothing. At the threshold, she paused. I hope one day he forgives you, she said, voice almost kind. Marjorie tilted her head. I hope, she replied. He learns what that word actually means. Melissa nodded, once, without conviction, then left. The door clicked shut behind her, sharp and final. Ruth appeared in the hallway, holding a tea towel, one eyebrow arched. She cry? No, Marjorie said. Shame. Marjorie carried the untouched second teacup back to the kitchen, steam still rising like something recently released. Then she noticed the corner of an envelope sticking out from the coat closet door. Tucked inside the frame, half hidden, she pulled it free. This one was handwritten. Marjorie and Benjamin's script, just her name. No mom, no return address. She didn't open it, not yet. She stood at the threshold of the kitchen, letter in hand, and looked out the back window. The pie dish from Leah's visit still sat near the sink, washed, drying upside down on a towel. The sunlight through the window cut through the steam on the teacup, dividing the air in half. Outside, tire tracks curved away down the street, but one set veered slightly, stopped by the mailbox, and reversed. Not all goodbyes are spoken. Some are written so there's no room for distortion. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before she touched it again. Ruth told her to burn it. Paula told her to forward it to her attorney. And part of her wanted to leave it sealed until the house was sold, and someone else's hands made that decision for her. But the not knowing itched. So on the 3rd morning, after Ruth had gone to the market and the sun slanted weakly through the frost-laced window, Marjorie slid a knife under the flap and opened it. The handwriting was Benjamin's, but hurried, sloppy, his lowercase g's looping like barbed wire. It wasn't cruel, not overtly. Just full of the kind of wounded logic that masqueraded as insight. You think money can make meaning. You think punishing me makes you righteous. I'm done trying to be forgiven for not being you. If this is how you sleep at night, congratulations. She folded it once, then twice. No anger, no tears. Just stillness. That night she wrote her own letter, not as reply, not as rebuttal, as record. Benjamin, I'm not angry anymore. I think you confuse that with indifference, but they're not the same. Anger expects something. Indifference releases it. Love is not a blank check. It's a series of choices. You made yours. I made mine. You were loved. You were provided for. You were taught that effort and decency are not the same thing. And still, you chose to test the edges of both. You once told me you hated how quiet this house was, that it felt like judgment, but it was never judgment. It was patience, the kind that waits for a person to meet it halfway. I waited too long. I'm not waiting anymore. There are photos in the envelope, proof that joy existed once, so neither of us can rewrite it. You smiling in the garden, you holding the hose like a sword, you laughing with dirt on your knees. You were good then. I hope you find that boy again, even if it's not here. M. The next morning, Ruth found her at the dining table, the letter already printed, folded and sealed. Ruth didn't ask what it said. Marjorie slid the envelope across the table anyway. Read it, Ruth did, eyes scanning silently, lips pressed together. When she finished, she gave a small nod. That's clean, she said. That's final. Marjorie smiled faintly. That was the goal. By noon, she'd placed the letter inside her fireproof box, tucked between her birth certificate and the will. Everything that mattered lived there now. Truth, proof, and peace, alphabetized in her own hand. She turned the key and slipped it onto the chain around her neck. For the first time in months, she felt something settle, like dust that had finally stopped trying to dance in someone else's wind. That afternoon, Paula called. All revisions filed and certified, she said. Deeds, trusts, letters of intent. Everything notarized and untouchable. It's all exactly as you wanted. Marjorie closed her eyes. Untouchable. That's right. Good, she said softly. That's how it should stay. Paula hesitated before hanging up. You sound finished. I am, Marjorie said. She looked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thin, deliberate flakes landing one by one on the sill. It was beautiful in the way endings sometimes are. Quiet, undeserved, absolute. Then the phone beeped. A second line. Unknown number. The caller ID flickered once, then stabilized. Benjamin Haynes, County Jail. Ruth's footsteps approached from the hall. Who is it? Marjorie didn't answer. She let it ring. Some battles never reach the courtroom. They die in the paperwork. It began with a certified letter. Thick envelope, government seal. The kind of thing that had once made Marjorie's pulse hitch. Now she simply slid it open with the same paring knife she used for oranges. Inside, legal notice. A contest petition, filed by Benjamin Harold Haynes, represented by the firm Langston, Mercer, and Pierce. Claim undue influence and mental coercion. Attached exhibits, none. Marjorie read it once, folded it, then called Paula. Expected? Paula asked. Predictable, Marjorie said. I'll draft the response. I'll bake something, Marjorie replied, setting the kettle on the stove. We both have our rituals. A week later, Paula arrived at the house with a leather binder nearly 3 inches thick. The smell of cold air and copier ink trailed her inside. Your son's attorneys requested full discovery, Paula said, setting the binder on the kitchen table. I gave them something better. She opened the cover. Inside were tabs, neat, color-coded, ruthless. Medical certification of capacity, signed by 2 physicians. Witness affidavits, including Ruth's and Leah's. Estate timeline, notarized and time-stamped. Letters of intent, initialed and sealed. Audio transcripts of consultations. Handwritten addendum pages, with Marjorie's looping script across every line. Paula flipped to the last section, a single sheet marked Summary Index, for the record. It read simply, all decisions made independently, willingly, and with full comprehension. Documentation enclosed. Marjorie ran her hand across the page, like one might test the texture of fine linen. Airtight, Paula said. Marjorie looked up. No, honest, that's better. 2 weeks later, the hearing date came and went without a word. No subpoenas, no depositions, just silence. And then the letter arrived. 1 page, official court stationery, clipped to the front of the binder Paula had returned. Order of dismissal, petition denied without hearing. Rationale, claim unsupported by evidence. Marjorie read the line twice, then poured herself a glass of water and took it to the porch. Ruth came out behind her carrying a blanket and her usual commentary. That's it? She asked. That's it, Marjorie said. He tried to shake a house built on bedrock. Ruth chuckled. And broke his nails instead. Paula joined them an hour later, coat collar high, cheeks ruddy from the cold. She handed Marjorie a small folder, copies of everything, neatly bound. He underestimated you, Paula said. The law didn't. Marjorie gave a small, tired smile. The law saw paper. He never saw the person who wrote it. They sat for a while, the 3 of them, watching the gray sky dim toward evening. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes clanged like metal laughter. Later, inside, Marjorie poured tea for herself and Ruth. He thought he could erase it, Ruth said, stirring sugar into hers, like you'd left a door cracked. He spent his whole life mistaking access for belonging, Marjorie said. Legacy isn't a lock, it's earned. She paused, looking out the window at the snow beginning to fall again. He thought it was owed. Ruth raised her cup. To debts collected. Marjorie clinked her cup lightly against it. And accounts closed. When Ruth had gone to bed, Marjorie returned to her study. The fireproof box sat in its place, steady and unbothered. She unlocked it, slipped the court order inside, and sat back down. The house hummed softly, alive with its own memory. Then, from the dark hallway, her phone buzzed on the console table. 3 short vibrations. No number this time. Just a text preview that stopped her hand midair. You always wanted peace? I found it first. She stared at the words until they blurred. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, she set the phone face down on the table, stood, and turned off the lamp. Not all fires destroy. Some just clarify the air. She read the message again the next morning. Not on impulse, not in dread, simply because it was there. You always wanted peace. I found it first. Marjorie smiled faintly. Not unkindly, not bitterly, just knowingly. The kind of smile that didn't need to be shared. Just worn for a moment and then put away. She walked to the hearth, knelt beside the firewood bin, and opened the small cedar box tucked behind the logs. Inside were the old envelopes, Benjamin's first letter, his typed messages, the unsigned threats, the printed court filings now stamped with rejection. She held them like you might hold dry leaves, fragile, rustling, brittle with meaning already drained out. Then she fed them, one by one, into the flames. She didn't watch them curl, didn't feed the fire with feeling, just stood, hands resting on her thighs, eyes soft. Let the ash hold it, she murmured. Ruth, leaning in the kitchen doorway with a mug in hand, said nothing. She just nodded once and took a long, slow sip of her tea. By noon, Leah had arrived with a thermos of vegetable soup and a canvas bag full of seed packets. I didn't want you cooking today, she said, setting everything on the counter. And I found the marigold starters you liked. The orange ones, not the gold. Marjorie took the thermos. Didn't realize you were planting spring in January. I'm planning it, Leah said. There's a difference. They moved outside after lunch, boots crunching on old gravel, scarves pulled tight, spades in hand. The garden looked hollow but not dead, just sleeping beneath the frost. Marjorie knelt beside the rosemary bush, clipping dead branches, tugging loose weeds with slow, practiced motion. Leah worked beside her, sleeves pushed up, cheeks pink from the cold. Ruth joined them 20 minutes later with a tray of lemon tea, placing it on the stone bench like an offering. We should prune the hydrangeas before the next freeze, she said, setting down her cup. Otherwise they bloom confused. Like people, Marjorie muttered. Leah laughed. They worked in silence for a while, comfortable, unhurried. A kind of conversation, built from shared space rather than words. At one point, Leah looked over and asked, "Do you think the roots still hold when the leaves are gone?" Marjorie sat back on her heels, wiped her gloves on her coat. "The good ones do," she said. "And the bad ones, you'll know, they snap when you try to pull them up." Leah nodded. "I think about that a lot," she said. "What's worth regrowing? What's just waiting to rot?" They fell quiet again, letting the garden fill in the rest. As dusk approached, they returned inside, muddy boots off, hands thawing, tea reheated. Marjorie stood at the sink, looking out over the yard, now darkening in the long shadowed light of early evening. The flower beds were still raw with turned earth, but the border had shape again, intent. Ruth leaned against the counter, drying the last dish. "You're not carrying him anymore," she said. Not a question. A benediction. "No," Marjorie replied. "I'm planting around him." Ruth gave a knowing nod. "That's how you build spring." Leah handed Marjorie a folded note, short, handwritten, in her careful cursive. "I didn't want to say it in front of Ruth," she said, "but I want you to know I never thought you were wrong. I just thought you were alone. I don't think that anymore." Marjorie opened it. One line. "Good endings grow from hard roots." She folded it carefully, slipped it into her apron pocket, didn't say thank you, just reached for Leah's hand. That night, Marjorie sat in her study with a new sheet of paper. No will, no testimony, just a note. She wrote, "This house was never haunted, just badly remembered." She placed it beside her mother's locket on the shelf. Not to be hidden, not to be sent, just kept. Then she turned out the light, and outside, beneath the frost-lined flower beds, something shifted. A root thickened, a stem readied, and in the silence, nothing burned. Closure isn't a door shutting. It's a key turned by your own hand. The letter to Leah wasn't long, just a few sentences, written in the same navy ink Marjorie used for anything that mattered. Tucked between folded parchment and a pressed sprig of rosemary from the back garden, it lived quietly in her fireproof box, alongside everything else she considered sacred. "Leah, you remembered me. That's what matters, not because it flatters me, but because it proves the memory wasn't one-sided. When people write about legacy, they talk about blood, but I think it's really about echo. You echoed something back to me I thought had been lost. This, all of it, is yours to carry forward. Or not. That part's yours to choose. Just know, I saw you, clearly, kindly, completely. That spring, the final estate revision was filed. The cabin deed now lived inside a foundation. A new clause directed its use, not as a rental or a family property, but as part of a scholarship fund for rural library science students, named after Harold, the H. Haynes Fellowship for Public Literacy, and Community Archives. The house itself, freshly appraised and legally secured, was to be held in trust as a literacy retreat for women over 60. A place to write what they had never been asked, to learn what they were told they were too old to try. To begin again. At the top of the trust, Leah Henderson, director, no cosigner required. When Paula handed her the papers, Leah cried only once, quietly, into her sleeve, on the courthouse steps. In May, Ruth had started using a cane. She refused to call it that, called it a walking opinion. She moved slower, but her eyes still caught everything. Marjorie watched her stir tea one afternoon, wrist trembling slightly, and said, "We did what we could." Ruth didn't look up. "You turned pain into permanence," she said. "Not everyone does." Marjorie nodded once, said nothing. The kettle hissed. The world didn't end. It just moved forward. In her journal that night, Marjorie wrote one last line beneath a full page of names, dates, notations, and dry legal logic. He said I'd be gone soon, and then he was. She closed the book, slid it into the drawer of her desk. When the papers were archived, Paula asked if she wanted to make any edits to the final clause in the narrative addendum, the one meant to accompany the trust should it ever go to court. Marjorie said no. It was already perfect. Typed in bold, left justified, 12-point Times New Roman. At Thanksgiving, my grandson said, "You'll be gone soon anyway." So I made sure he'd be gone from my will first.